In this video, we're going to talk about trim and extend. The trim command allows us to shorten objects or remove a part of an object, but you can't remove the entire object. So for that, obviously, we just use erase. In order to trim, let's say we wanted to trim this one line here at this point here. So where this horizontal line comes across, we want to trim this part of it up here. So we'll start out simple and get a little more complex as we go along. So if I have the trim command up on the ribbon, I'll say trim. Down on the command line it says cutting or current settings, projection equals UCS, edge equals none. We'll get into edge a little later. We don't use projection at all. So when it says select cutting edges, select objects, I can pick the thing that's going to determine where the trim happens. So I want to get rid of that part, but keep this part down here. So this is the object that does the trimming. You have to have a piece of geometry to do the trimming for you, whether it's a line or a circle or an arc. You have to have geometry to trim. So I select the cutting edge first. When I'm done selecting cutting edges, I hit enter. And then it says to select the object to trim, or shift select to extend, or fence, crossing, project, edge, erase, and undo. Always keep in mind that what's inside those square brackets are the options. In this case, we're not going to use one of the options. We're just going to select the object to trim. So when I pick this part of the object, that's what goes away. If I had something on the other side of the cutting edge, let's say this portion down here, and I select that, it trims down below it. If that's all the trimming that I want to do, I can hit enter, and I'm all done. Let's try another one. Let's say we picked this upper horizontal line and the lower one at the same time. So I'm going to say trim. When it says to select cutting edges, I'll pick both this one and hit enter. Now, if I pick something that's above one cutting edge or below the cutting edge, it trims on that. If you pick something between two cutting edges, it trims between them. If I picked both above and then above again, this one, it'll trim back to here. If I want to trim multiple objects in the same trim command, I've already picked my two cutting edges. I could use crossing by picking and dragging to the left. Notice I can't use window here, but I can use crossing. And it trims all of those back to there. Do it again up here. Use crossing by picking where there is no object and dragging away from it. Notice that either way is crossing in the trim command. That one had already been trimmed back, so it wouldn't trim it anymore. I can't trim it out of existence. If, again, I wanted to get rid of that, I would just say erase, select the object, and hit enter. Let me zoom in a little bit on this area here. Let's say I wanted to trim several of these pieces out. I could use trim and pick multiple cutting edges with crossing. Hit enter because I'm done selecting objects. When it says to select the objects to trim, wherever I pick, it's between cutting edges in this section, so it's trimming for me. Let me undo that and get back a little bit. I'll undo several steps, get back where I started. Now, if I say trim, one of the things on the command line it says is select cutting edges, select objects, or, and the default is select all. So if I hit enter, everything in the drawing is now a cutting edge. And I can tell that by going through and just picking some points, or using crossing, etc., etc. So when you just hit enter, when it asks you to select cutting edges, everything in the drawing is a cutting edge if you hit enter. Let's pan over and see how extend works. Pretty much the same as trim, but this time instead of selecting cutting edges, you're going to select boundary edges. And when you see the trim command up here, the little arrow to the right of it has extend below it. So now I'm in the extend command. In the extend command, again, it says projection equals UCS, edge equals none, and then it says select boundary edges, select objects. If I pick a single boundary edge like this one up here and hit enter because I'm done selecting boundary edges, now I can do individual picks or use crossing to extend a bunch of them. The same thing would be true down here. I could pick all of these, but they won't go down to here because I didn't pick that as a boundary edge. So I'd have to do another extend. When it says to select the boundary edges, I'll pick this one, hit enter, and when I want to extend all of these, they all go down. Let me undo a couple of steps. Okay, now let's say I wanted to go in both directions. If I say extend and I pick two boundary edges, one up here and one down here, and hit enter, If I pick one at this end, it goes up. Pick at this end, and it goes down. On a line or an arc, anything on one side of the midpoint or the other would go in one direction or the other. In fact, if I got out of the command and started extend again, let's say I just picked the top one and hit enter. If I pick down at the bottom, it does not extend it because there's no edge in that direction. So when it says no edge in that direction, it really means you pick below, in this case, below the midpoint, it can't extend in that direction and find that boundary edge. So if I say extend again and pick both of them and hit enter, when I use crossing on the top, it goes up. Use crossing on the bottom, they go down. Now we have let's say we want to extend an arc. I'll draw an arc in here. I'll draw a couple of them. I've got one arc there and another here. If I said extend and selected this as the boundary edge and hit enter, it would extend this up to it. But if I try to extend this to it, it won't happen because the circle would never hit there. The arc would never go far enough to touch that line. So this one will not extend where that one did. You can never extend it. You'd think you'd be able to extend this and have it come around and finish the circle. But AutoCAD will never let you extend to create a circle. We have another situation. Let's say that I had a line that went over here, and it never quite meets these lines. So when I go to Trim, I'll come up here and go back to Trim, select this as the cutting edge, and hit Enter. Now if I go to pick either side of these, it does not trim them because this thing isn't long enough to go over and touch it. Here's a case where on the command line, inside the brackets, one of the choices is Edge. If I right click and say Edge, it says what do you want the edge mode to be? So implied in edge extension mode, it's either no extend, which is the default, or extend. So if I say extend the edge mode, that means take this limited line and make it unlimited. So if I right click and say extend, we're now in extend mode instead of no extend. So this treats this as though it's an infinite line, and now it would go ahead and extend that line so it does the trimming, even though the line isn't long enough to do that. The same thing would be true for the extend command. If I had a line up here, and I said extend, if I pick this as the boundary edge, it now says, in fact, let me start over again so we can see what it said on the command line here. Let me try extend again. It said projection equals UCS, edge, instead of saying no extend, it now says extend. So now if I pick this object as my boundary edge and go through these three, they extend up to it because when I changed the edge mode for this line in the trim command, it changed it for the extend command also. Not just for the line, but for everything. If I have a circle can be trimmed by something that bisects it at least twice. So in other words, if I get into the trim mode and the trim command, right click and change my extend, the edge mode back to no extend, draw a line through here, and I say trim and pick this line and hit enter, I try to trim it and it won't because it still leaves it as a 360-degree circle. If I have two lines and say trim and make both of them cutting edges, I could either pick out here or in here because I have either two cutting edges or the same cutting edge that extends through the object so it hits it twice. So now when I say trim, select my cutting edge and hit enter, I can either take the top or the bottom half of the circle off. So circles can be trimmed, but they have to either intersect twice with one line or intersect twice with two lines or arcs or other circles. Circles can trim circles. So as I say trim, basically any two objects like circles and lines and arcs can trim each other as long as they meet whatever requirements the edge mode imposes, that kind of thing. So play around with edge and extend. One interesting thing is that if I'm in the, let me move this line over a little bit. If I'm in the trim command, on the command line it says select cutting edges. What if I pick a line up there and one down here and then hit enter? It says fence, crossing, project, edge, erase, undo. If I say, and it also says on the command line, select the object to trim or shift to extend. So if I picked this line here and this one down here, it's trimming using that cutting edge. But if I hold down the shift key, I'm holding down shift and selecting these, it's now doing the extend command. So when it says on the command line shift select to extend, if I hold down shift and select, it turns it into the extend command. When I let go of shift, it's back to turning it into the trim command.